it is one language, and actually, we've always lived in a multilingual society, and because there are all these other languages like music and color that express things, and people actually understand what those are, what those things are.
Today, I'm joined by Philip Clarke, who has worked in the arts and cultural sector for many years and also in arts administration, working at the Crafts Council for New Zealand, Artwork and Creative New Zealand. He was the inaugural director of Object Space and volunteers with involvement in several art organisations, including The Big Idea and the Bloomhart Foundation, where he is the current chair. And we've got him on The Big Idea now. Kia ora, Philip, and welcome.
Kia ora.
For those who don't know, what is your relationship with the art world? You've been involved in it for quite a while, but for those who don't know, can you give us a bit of a rundown in terms of your relationship with the arts and creative sector?
Sure. I guess I'd always been interested in art, but I'm thinking going back to my childhood, but I was not good at a practical sense, like being a visual artist or acting. I wasn't particularly comfortable with that. And so I went to university and I did some study, and I ended up working in a cultural organisation, that's the Crafts Council, in a sort of professional role around information. And it was a very small organisation, and it was all hands to the pump, when things had to happen. And that sort of provided me with the opportunity to step more into the art side. And it's fair to say at that time, this is the early 80s, the idea of like arts administration and people being able to make a career in the arts, but not as a practitioner, was sort of a new thing. And a lot of the people who were in those sort of roles had some training as an artist or something like that. And so I sort of see myself as part of the first sort of wave of professional arts administrators. And then having made that step into, like, from another professional area into arts administration, I was fortunate to continue on, and that's quite an achievement. And I sort of say that modestly, because I know a lot of people who have, very skilled people, that it's been quite difficult to sustain a career over 30 or 40 years because the issues to do with arts funding. And certainly at one point, I had to, my job came to an end and I was a tolls operator, and I really enjoyed that time. And there were lots of artists and arts people working there because that's what you did. It's now people, go in and out of hospo to some extent. But that's what I did. And, so I guess you have to have a bit of tenacity to keep going. And I never really was very careerist in the way that I structured things or thought about things, because, there weren't opportunities coming along every 5 minutes. Often the opportunities just happened when people left. And went on to other things. So there weren't new jobs. You were just stepping into a pre-existing job, and someone had to go before there was a vacancy. So anyway, I probably have got off the question a little bit. So anyway, that's
Can you
how
talk to us about that as an arts administration? Because that's such a when the general public think of artistry or creatives, they think of people on the tools, right? Creating, doing.
Yeah.
But as an arts administrator, that's almost like, well, how do you explain that to someone? So, I mean, day to day, what does that look like? Paint me a picture. As an art administrator, what are some of the key things you are trying to do to help?
Well, I guess in a way, another word for that is organizer. And so there's one organisation I worked for, Artwork. We organised artists working in community or public settings. So the artists, what they might be painting murals or doing drama, creating, writing, and then performing drama in schools or public settings or various sort of places, but say not in theatres. And you just sort of like do all the things that you have to do to make sure that happens. It might be ringing up the city council and or organising the closure of the road, checking out health and safety issues for things, making sure that people get paid, and so that's a very broad thing. And
So what's that
then,
like for you, Philip, as someone who, I guess you're involved with a lot of different artists, you get to see a lot of disciplines,
yeah,
you
yeah,
get to
yeah,
see a lot
yeah.
of, you're the person who gets to see all the shows, right? You're at the movies, you get to see all the films come on show, you're at the back getting to watch them all. What's that like for you to be able to experience art in that way where you're helping people, but you get to see so
Well,
much?
it's very good, and I mean, I was working for Creative New Zealand for a long time in the Auckland office, and certainly there was the Auckland office in those days was much smaller than it is now, and as you say, my job was sort of working with people doing all sorts of things, poetry, visual arts, theatre, opera, whatever, and it's great to get to know people. It's great when people come along, and part of my role was talking to people about funding. And so they would sort of, share their dreams, say, I want to paint the Auckland Harbour Bridge yellow. Like why they wanted to do that. And you actually, in order to help them make a really good, say, funding case, you have to say, well, why is it yellow? Why shouldn't it be green? All of those sorts of things. So it's a very sort of I guess I found it quite a privileged sort of situation
Yeah.
because all these conversations are confidential.
Did you
Finding
have
out,
some crazy conversations? Like I imagine some ideas and some pictures you
yeah,
heard would have
yeah,
been
yeah.
pretty
I mean,
outrageous.
sometimes people come along and the ideas are just crazy, and it's through that dialogue of saying, why do you want to do this? What's the motivation? And so you get to know the people. But you also then, I think, in that work, those structuring those conversations, and you find out a lot about creative practice. And even though I'm not a practitioner, I think I understand quite a lot about practice, and I also understand how successful projects are executed. Like you just don't forget, like it's not all about the idea, but, you've got to have a budget, and that budget has to sort of add up in its own logic. And then so that you understand a lot about the practicality as well as the conception of things.
Yeah, is that something you see some artists maybe struggle with? Because often when people start their creative journey, they come from a place of they're not thinking about that; they're thinking about creating, right? And then it comes to this, I guess, when you're trying to get funding or you got to make applications, and you're asking these really great questions about, well, why do you want to paint the bridge yellow? Is there something you see or help that has been beneficial for some artists out there to get across that bridge
I
and
don't,
be
I don't,
successful?
I don't know if I sort of totally agree with that in the sense that I think some people, and it's not because they're an artist or not, are actually incredibly organized and thoughtful about doing things. And other types of personalities, sometimes are a bit ethereal and all that sort of stuff.
It's a good
And
word.
and you in having that conversation about, like, you say, well, have you thought about this? And have you thought about that? And they say, okay, I haven't thought about that, but there's no resistance. And then occasionally you find people who are actually sort of resistant to anything anyone says other than themselves. And I guess my sense is, I'm almost 70. The thing I've learned is that they're just different sorts of people, and they're an artist, or, they could be an accountant, or they could be, I don't know, a person who works in a supermarket. And some people are responsive, and they're just different people. So I sort of not so. I just, the way I've experienced things is, yeah, it's comes down to different sorts of people, and some people also have very long term ideas. Like it's not just about, oh, I'd like to do this thing, in the summer in Auckland. Just in Auckland, the Auckland Readers and Writers Festival is just about to start. I don't know how many years it's going, but I remember Peter Wells and Stephanie Johnson, the founders of it, coming in to talk to me at Creative New Zealand about getting their first grant. And I don't know, maybe that's 20 years ago. And it was such a sort of modest thing. And I knew both Peter and Stephanie. And so it was a sort of very relaxed conversation. Anyway, they successfully got a grant from Creative New Zealand. And it's sort of like fantastic for me just to, read the program and sometimes go to events that I have a sort of knowledge of what that organisation and that project was in its infancy, and it has, through extremely able and skilled guiding by the people involved, continue to grow, and now thousands and thousands of people attend it every year.
When I think of the arts sector in New Zealand, I think of it's super important. And I'm keen to get a gauge on your view on how do we, this is probably big picture thinking, as a country, value our arts? Because I think they're so important. And when you talk about thousands of people attending these events or going to see artists work or artists doing their thing, it brings a sense of joy and happiness and a feeling. But I guess, how do you measure that? But from your point of view, where's our art scene at the moment in the country? Because you would have seen so much over your years being involved in it. Where do you sort of gauge it now on a pinboard?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. It is very important. I've devoted my, professional life to supporting it and being part of it. I mean, to me, art making is actually a really important human activity. And, talking about those people I might have met in my career, for them, making art is just a really important thing. And it's unfortunate that as a society, we often are told that making art and participating in it and viewing it is a sort of discrete activity. That, like if things are going well in the world, we can afford to pay for art or pay for the production of art. But in fact, many of the people I have met, like a musician, they know, so many people know when they're 5 years old that they want to be a musician or they want to be a visual artist. And it goes to the core of who they are. And there's ways for our society or for individuals to express what's going on in the world. And the language or the vocabulary that any particular artist or group might be using may not be the language that everyone understands. But it is one language, and actually, we've always lived in a multilingual society, and because there are all these other languages like music and color that that express things, and people actually understand what those things are. So I sort of feel at the moment the arts are having a bit of a hard time because there's a sort of sense that maybe we can't afford them, or the arts have got to perform like something else, and it's all about exports. And I just think that, there's a lovely Chinese phrase that I read years ago, all about culture. We often use this term, arts and culture, and there's this Chinese sort of definition, I guess you call it, of culture, and it is just culture is the water in which we swim. And I just think that was a beautiful way of understand or having a grip on these things, is that culture is this thing that is all around us, and through the arts we're expressing aspects of our culture. We're often experiencing aspects of contemporary culture, issues in contemporary culture. And so much of what is made is sort of like evidence of what's going on, you know?
I
Sometimes it's really hard to identify something in language about what's going on. But then if an artist, could be a visual artist or a musician, creates something, then you can actually, then it's over there. It is caught up in an object.
I and I love how you put that, because I think, just from my own experience about arts and culture, I think recently in Porirua, they're trying to get funding for like a polyfest out there, right, where it's young children who identify as Māori Pacifica and non-Māori Pacifica want to join in and express their culture, right, through art, song, dance, and play. It's like, well, how do you put a value on that in terms of people being able to do it? But then you ask the people involved in it, and they'll tell you just how amazing it is. Is that something in our arts society? I mean, how can we better communicate with the wider public, the non-arts community, just how important these things are, so everyone sees the value in it? Because I know you and I see the value in
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. I think that there's been a whole lot of issues about how arts and culture are valued. And in my sort of recent reading about these things, because I did a few years ago do a master's degree in cultural policy through an international university. And so I'm sort of just interested in all of this stuff. And I guess my sort of thinking about value is these days is that it is sort of really related to ideas of democracy and participation, and like your polyfest example is quite a good pertinent example. And yeah, I think arts and culture are ways of people participating in society. And I think all around the world we see issues and difficulties in society where people aren't allowed to participate. People are second-class citizens. And that leads, violence, warfare. And so to me, a lot of the value is related to enabling people to stand tall, participate in society, and use their own language. And I'm using the word language in quite a broad way. It could be literally a language, or it could be an art form. Use their own languages to just take their place in society. And, that's what we call a rich, dynamic, beautiful society. And who doesn't want to live in that? That's the place I want to live in, a beautiful, rich, dynamic society where there's lots of things on show. Hopefully, many of them are free and because of public funding or something like that. And I don't know. That's what I sort of think of as relating to value. And I guess the other thing that I'm interested in is this idea where arts are an opportunity for speculation and critical thinking and asking questions about society. And certain musicians do that, writers do that. And so that's very important. And, even having a good free press. And, I was just reading in the newspaper the other day about, European countries, I'm not going to name it, where actually, but they've got basically an authoritarian government, trying to institute limits on the freedom of the press. And so all of these things are important, and actually what's going on in other places in the world tell us that some of these things are fragile as well. These permissions or the ability to do that is sort of fragile. And yeah, so I just think that all this sort of creative expression creates a bolder, more robust society.
I love how you talk about the color and just seeing the diversity. And, I think about my kids. I'm like, yeah, I'd love for them to grow up in a world where they can see different things, experience
Yeah.
different things, that participation. But I want to know from you, if you're at a cafe having a coffee with a friend who's not in the art scene, and they ask a question like, "Oh, Philip, why is the arts and creative scene important? I know you've got a sales pitch in you. What's your elevator pitch to really bring it home? Because I feel your passion here, but to those on the outside, Will, what do you say to them? Like if someone goes, why do we need the arts?
Why do
Right?
we need the arts? Well, we just need the arts because people want to do it. It's not this, like so many people, I think it's not an option for them. Like they are hardwired to make or create. And that's why we need it, because if we don't actually say that we need it, we're sort of excluding certain people. We're saying, okay, we don't like you or we don't need you because you're an artist. You don't have value to the society. So part of it is getting back to my idea about democracy, is that, there's that famous line about Nelson Mandela saying he wants everybody to step up and play to their magnificence. I can't remember exactly what the line is, but it's about, like, he wants everybody, he was talking about South Africans, he wanted everyone to be the magnificent person they are. And for lots of people, and not just artists, lots of people can be magnificently creative. But the sort of jobs that lots of people have to do, there's limited opportunities for that. And that's why, recreational arts activity is really important, because it's something that people not everyone has the chance to do 9 to 5, but they can do else at other times. And so to me, that's why it's important, because it actually is saying that all sorts of people have a place in our society. And having said that, there are people with great skills who invest huge amounts of time and effort to, really reach great heights as, say, a performer. And that's fantastic. And I love to see that sort of, very high quality sort of performance or artwork or whatever. But that's art also just exists in everybody. And you don't have to be, I don't think you don't have to be the famous opera singer like Kerry Te Kanawa to actually say art is important across the society.
When you look back at your career to date, have there been any standout moments for you where you've just felt like a pinch yourself moment, thinking, "Man, I'm so pumped that I'm involved in this industry. Like something's happened. You've seen a performance, or you've seen someone grow through the arts and culture sector, where you thought, "Whoa, this is pretty special."
Um, how do I answer this? Well, one thing that just sort of pops to mind, very early on when I started at Object Space, and I was the first director, and it was a very small startup. Initially, it was just one staffer, me. Worked very long, and then I got a colleague. One of the first, I think it was in the first year or so, we had a show by a young guy called Joe Sheehan, who had never had a solo show before. And he lived in Wellington at the time, and he sent me drawings of his punamu carving, just drawings. And then he was going to be in Auckland, like passing through at Christmas. So I met him, I think, on Boxing Day. We sort of just like, you're always on the job. And so we talked, and he was still making the work. And I just sort of thought, I trust this guy. Someone I greatly respect recommended him. And anyway, we communicated, and then he just arrived with his work, and it was just sensational. And it sort of was almost in this electric moment, I think, where people just saw stone carving that they had never seen in New Zealand before. He's now represented in all sorts of museums and very sort of major collections in New Zealand and elsewhere. And I'm still in contact with Joe, and he's in Wellington. But that was sort of like this amazing moment. And I remember thinking to myself, why am I feeling so confident? Because I haven't seen any of the work. I've met him for 25 minutes, but I don't know. I just sort of believed. And so I think some of those things that are very memorable are where you feel that your hunches, whatever they are, have come off, and it's sort of a bit of a mystery. but that was very, very exciting. And I remember all sorts of people just coming to that show, and it was sort of fantastic. And I know that it sort of changed Joe's professional career. He got a high-level dealer out of it, and all sorts of very interesting purchases work immediately. And
it makes it worthwhile, that Boxing Day trip, hey?
Yeah, exactly. and it's sort of like, it doesn't matter that we only had about $27 for 52 to pull the show off, because the work was sensational. No one's sort of looking at the fact that it wasn't like a Te Papa scale production. Yeah. It was the work that was fantastic. And so I just always remember that. And yeah.
It's a beautiful kōrero. I want to know, with all the artists you've worked with, or, including Joe, and that, is there something you see amongst them, that hunch that you've got, that you've developed so well over the years, that like, yep, this could be something this person could do well? Like, is there something you see, a common trait amongst people, without spitting anyone's names off or anything like that? But is there something you see, a trait, skill, or a characteristic that you think, yeah?
Well, I guess. One thing that is always sort of appealing is where you see people making new work that is incredibly sort of exciting, and there's progress in it, and so they're not making things the same thing all the time. There's changes, and you can see that there are that new ideas, completely new ideas, are just sort of coming into their life, and they're exploring it. So that's fantastic. On the other hand, I also sometimes value people who are in a particular vein of exploration, and they're just sort of moving along there. And there's something also about people just continuing to explore in the same territory. And, it's just, I don't know, it's sometimes you can tell with those people who are sort of staying in the same territory that whether they're sort of, sometimes it is possible to see that they're a bit bored, and then others are in the same zone, but they're still finding new things, and somehow it's sort of discernible. I guess it's one of those things that you have to keep on looking as a viewer. You keep on looking, and you notice new things. And I sort of think that because I've always gone to lots of events on top of my work, because I think, that they're very important in the arts community. That's where a lot of artists go to support each other, hang out. You learn so much about just hanging out with people. But also, I think I've sort of trained myself, by just looking very seriously at things, and you develop a sort of visual intelligence. And actually going out and looking is a sort of, and really looking is something that you can get so much out of. it's not just it's not a really passive thing. It can be a very passive thing, but if you are really committed and you do it regularly, you get so much out of it.
So when you're going to these artists and you're visiting them, what are you taking on board? Are you looking for that change? You mentioned before, some you can see them making progress by changing. Is that people you kind of know? Oh, this artist here they're working on their craft. They're trying
Yeah,
this
yeah.
thing, they're evolving. Evolving into the next stage, and you're seeing them, and you might visit them every 6 months or once a year, and you're seeing that change. You're like, oh, yep, this person's.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, sometimes, those people who are sort of staying in the same vein, what they're doing is they're acquiring new technical skills to allow them to explore a similar territory. So the territory's the same, but there is some development because they're employing new materials or new techniques or something like that. So that's what is great to see. And I don't know. I just think that there's so many great artists out there. It's really hard to sort of cover them off. I know when I was at Object Space and we were a presenter in the sense that we'd present exhibitions, there were always lots and lots of great people and great ideas for shows, and there were just there wasn't enough room. We could have filled a place 2 or 3 times the size. So there's lots of people out there, and there's been there's been a big increase in the last 20, 25 years, I guess, of people going to art school. And not all of them have been able to turn into full-time artists of different types, but there are a lot of practitioners out there.
What advice would you give from an arts administrator point of view for artists who are putting together applications or looking for that, the practical support, which you're so good at? You understand that the setting up the shows, the calling the councils, the getting the roads blocked out or streets blocked out. You know that side so well. But for the artists on the other side, is there some tips or tricks you can give to them to help them on that side of the fence? Maybe it's funding apps. Is it trying to find mentors? Is it looking to other people for help or past recipients? What advice would you give to them?
I think all the different funding agencies are a little bit different. They ask all sorts of slightly different questions. They've all got different criteria. And I think you just sort of have to just tune in and listen to the advice that you're getting. So, if it's a local council, local authority that is got some fund, then the best thing is to ring up a person or get the information and say, hey, give me a bit of a steer, or I don't really understand what you're talking about in question 7 or something like that. And so I think, my experience is there's a lot of people out there who are willing to help. And so it's a matter of just actually plugging in to those sources of help and just getting a bit of a steer. And usually, people want to give people who've taken the time to be in touch, email or telephone, whatever it is. If you've made the effort to be in touch, people want to help. So that's a sort of simple thing, is just listen to what people are telling you. But, it's a more general thing. I've always said to people that the best thing you can do in terms of creating a successful career is just make the best work you can possibly make. And I know that's sort of it sounds like a sort of silly thing, but not a silly thing, but it's sort of superficial. But what I mean by that is just get really serious. Don't just think, okay, I've got a show coming up and I can knock out a few widgets or whatever it is in the week before. Okay, you might get some sales, but the more that you think, the more that you invest, that time and thinking into your practice, I think people see that at the end. I was talking before about the visual intelligence and looking. The more you put into it, the more serious you can be about what you're trying to do and think, whatever it is. That is the best thing you can do in terms of creating some success related to your practice.
I want to know from you at this stage of your journey, what are your hopes, dreams, and aspirations? Say you're 70 years old now, in another 70 years, say there's the next Philip Clarke and we're chatting to them and we're having this kōrero around the arts sector. What are your hopes and dreams for Aotearoa and what the arts and culture sector looks like for us as a people?
Well, I hope that it will that all the arts are flourishing. I like to think that a lot of decision making in the arts is made by communities of practitioners rather than people on committees in Wellington. I mean, I guess there's always a role for that, but I like to see decision making that's more related to the idea of democracy that I was talking about. This idea that arts and culture is a right for everybody, and that somehow decisions relating to that are sort of made by the people. The decisions are made very closely to where the people are that are involved with the decision, rather than made very remotely inside rooms with closed doors. So I guess that's what I'm interested in. And I don't know, I think it's hard to sort of prognosticate into the future, because I think arts and culture are very dynamic, areas. And so what people might be interested in, or doing, is likely to be very different. But I guess I would like to see arts and culture more visible in the city. Like, I went into Auckland City just a few days ago into the CBD, which I don't go into all the time, and I thought, if I was a visitor, like, what was on the street tell me about New Zealand? And actually, I was just down the bottom of town, because that's where my bus, the bus stops, and you've got all these high-level international chains. I'm not going to mention them, but
I know who you're talking about, Philip. You don't need to tell me.
Like where you have to drop $10,000 for a bag of cotton wool or something.
Yes.
But like, where's the Kiwi culture or the local cultures? And maybe you don't expect to see that much. I mean, there are souvenir shops in that sort of main street, but actually, I would like to see some more visibility in the cities.
It's so cool. Like, I just think of it, because I still think we're quite a young country. We're still figuring out our identity, and it's evolving over time. And if we think back 70 years back in the past, where the arts and culture scene was then, where it is now, and where it will be in 70 years, like, it's pretty exciting. You can see some pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah. I guess the thing that I would like, just picking up on your question now, of thinking, is that I think New Zealand, there was a lot of flourishing in the arts, sort of like from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s period. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to the place that art had in the school curriculum. And, you mentioned that I'm part of the Bloomhart Foundation. I'm not the chair anymore, but I was up till about a year ago. But Dame Doreen Bloomhart, who established the foundation, she was a national arts and crafts policy educator for secondary schools. And she was a magnificent advocate for arts practice or arts education in schools. And every kid going to a New Zealand high school had some exposure to practical art making. And we don't have that anymore. There's some stuff in there, but it's the role of arts in schools is really diminished. And there are other things now around new technologies and all that sort of stuff, and that's important. But actually, I think if we value art in our society, we will actually introduce and expose all our kids to a whole range of arts practices. Some kids might enjoy it and just move on. Others may just turn them on for a lifetime onto something. But everyone who, once you've actually got your hands dirty with, say, clay or done some painting or created a bit of music, once you move on and then you encounter that stuff as, say, an adult, you've got a bit of an understanding of all the skills that are required to create something. It sort of breeds, that introduction at school breeds respect for those people who are what we might call excellent practitioners. And so, I would like to think that arts were in schools, and certainly, the period that I was thinking of, many, famous people who became really well-known professional artists started off as art teachers in schools. And because it was a way of earning some money that was sympathetic to being a practitioner, and I think it was just really important.
Well, kia ora, Philip. I love your vision for Aotearoa in terms of the arts world and getting arts teachers in there and thinking, we've got a lot of creative people in Aotearoa who maybe are just waiting to discover that little bit of fire, to get the creative juices flowing. And how wonderful would it be to have them start that journey a lot earlier, maybe in kura, in school.
Yeah,
but I appreciate
absolutely.
your time, brother. Thank you so much for your insights and your opinions and just your experience over the years. It's been really cool to kōrero with you, and I appreciate your time on The Big Idea, Philip.
Thanks, Sa.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.